When I was younger, I needed a part-time job to make ends meet. I found an opportunity as a night guard at the old Hawthorne Library. It sounded easy and calm compared to my busy days. In the daytime, the library was bright and full of people reading books. But at night, it felt different, big and quiet. I had always loved the library during the day, with its sunlit reading corners and the smell of old books filling the air. But nighttime in the library was an entirely different experience. On my first day, Mrs. Grace, the librarian, showed me around. The library was big, with really tall ceilings and big windows. The sunlight made the place look magical. There were many shelves filled with books. At the very back of the library, there was an old section. Here, the books looked really old and had a lot of dust on them. It seemed like people didn't come to this part much. Mrs. Grace said not many read those old books anymore. The whole place felt special and full of stories. My job seemed simple enough. I'd stroll through the library's dimly lit corridors at night, double-checking that all doors were firmly locked and ensuring no one was left behind. The guy who had this job before me had quit out of the blue. No one really talked about it, and I didn't ask much. I just figured maybe night shifts weren't for him. But as the days went on, I couldn't help but wonder why he left so suddenly. One night, about 2 weeks after I started, something strange happened. I was walking through the old section of the library, where the really old books were. Everything was quiet, but then I heard something. A soft whisper. I stopped, trying to listen closely. The whispering got a bit louder. It sounded like someone saying, "Look, find, see." It sent chills down my spine, making the dark corners of the old section feel even more spooky. Unsure of where it was coming from, I tried to dismiss it as a figment of my imagination. Night after night, the whispers didn't stop. In fact, they got louder and sounded more urgent. I felt like they were calling me. I had to find out where they were coming from. One really dark night, I followed the whispers. They led me to the very back of the old section, to a super dusty bookshelf. One book stood out from the rest. It was called Mysteries of Hawthorne Town. The moment I looked at it, a cold breeze blew past me, even though all the windows were closed. The room felt extra cold and spooky, and I felt like the book was hiding a big secret. I carefully opened the book, and what I saw inside was surprising. It wasn't just a book. It was full of old newspaper clippings about strange things that happened in the town. One story gave me the chills. It was about a lady named Emily, who used to work at this library in the 1950s. One day, she just disappeared and no one knew where she went. But the creepiest part, people said they still heard her voice in the library, especially in this old section where I was now. While I was reading, a cold wind blew around me, even though all the windows were shut tight. The pages of the book started moving all by themselves. They stopped at a page with a handwritten note that said, "Help me find peace." I got goosebumps. Then, crazy things started happening. Books just fell off the shelves all by themselves. The lights started going on and off. And then, in the dark, I saw something. A shadowy figure of a lady. It looked like Emily from the pictures. She pointed down to the floor, and that whispering voice was back, saying, "Look, find." It felt like the whole library had come alive, and I was right in the middle of its mystery. Taking a deep breath, I pushed aside a big old wooden cabinet that was in the way. Underneath, there was a hidden door in the floor. I opened it and found stairs going down to a small hidden room. The room was full of really old stuff, but one thing caught my eye. It was a necklace with a picture of Emily inside it. Suddenly, the room got super cold, and I saw a ghostly shadow that looked like Emily. She was pointing to a wall. The wall was covered in old newspapers with stories about things that happened in the library long ago. Everything went dark for a few seconds, and when the lights came back, the ghost was gone, but I was still holding Emily's necklace. The next day, I showed Mrs. Grace the necklace. Her eyes went wide, and she said, "This belonged to Emily. We both agreed to keep it safe in the library." But one big question is still in my mind. What was the library's old secret that Emily knew? Every time I work at night, I feel like the library is still hiding something big. During my university years, when exams were near, I always looked for quiet places to study. The Rimmer Library was my favorite. It had big, old-style windows and so many books. It was the oldest library on campus, and there were spooky stories about it. Some students whispered that the library was built on top of an old graveyard. I didn't really believe it. I thought they were just trying to scare the new students. But the more time I spent there, especially in the evenings, the more I felt like there was some truth to those stories. Sometimes, the air felt colder in certain parts, and shadows seemed to move when no one was there. It was easy to feel like someone or something was always watching. One evening, just a few days before my big exams, I was on the hunt for a super quiet spot in the library where I could concentrate. As I walked through the library, I got lost in its endless rows of bookshelves. That's when something strange caught my eye. Hidden away in a corner, behind a giant bookshelf, was a door. This door looked super old, with its paint chipped away and hinges covered in rust. There was a sign hanging above, but it looked worn out. I could just make out the words, "The Forgotten Isle." Feeling a bit brave, I decided to open the door and see what was inside. The moment I touched the handle, a cold wind blew past me. The door made a loud, long creak as it opened. Inside, it was much darker than the rest of the library. I could barely see, but it looked like there were shelves filled with really old books, covered in thick layers of dust. It seemed like nobody had been here in ages. The air felt heavy, and there was a strange smell, like old paper mixed with something else I couldn't place. As I walked deeper into the aisle, I had this weird feeling like someone was watching me. The stories that students whispered about the library being haunted started to feel real. I could hear faint sounds, like distant whispers or pages turning on their own. Every step I took, the atmosphere felt more and more spooky. It was like this part of the library was hiding secrets from long, long ago. I had settled into a creaky old chair, eager to dive into my studies. With a stack of notes on one side and a cup of coffee on the other, I felt ready. I began to flip through one of the old books from the shelf, thinking maybe it had some interesting facts that could help with my research. But as I read deeper into the pages, the room started feeling different. What was once a comforting silence became an unsettling quietness. The air around me turned icy cold, making me shiver. It felt like the very walls and books were holding their breath, waiting for something. Then, I heard it. Soft voices, like whispers, started coming from the distant corners of the aisle. They repeated, "Watch, listen, learn." The sound was so faint, I thought I was just hearing things. But when I looked up, my heart almost stopped. There, amidst the dimly lit bookshelves, I saw shadowy figures moving. They looked like students from a really long time ago, wearing old-fashioned clothes. They were huddled together, discussing something, lost in their world of studies. They seemed so real, yet so ghostly. Panicking, I quickly packed up my notes. My hands were shaking, and my cup of coffee almost toppled over. I wanted to scream, to call someone, but fear had tightened its grip on me. Without looking back, I dashed out of that room. As I left, I could still hear the faint whispers echoing behind me. I made a promise to myself right then. I'd never step foot in the Forgotten Isle ever again. No matter how curious I was, some mysteries are better left unsolved. The next morning, despite the fear from the previous night, my curiosity was nagging at me. I needed answers. So, I went to the library early, hoping to catch the librarian before the usual crowd started coming in. Finding her at the main desk, I hesitantly asked about the Forgotten Isle. She looked up, her eyes narrowing in confusion. The Forgotten Isle, she repeated slowly, as if trying to remember. After a few moments, she shook her head. I've been working here for over 20 years, and I've never heard of any Forgotten Isle in this library. I felt a mix of relief and confusion. Was it possible that I'd imagined the whole thing? Maybe I was more stressed about the exams than I thought, and it played tricks on my mind. But it had felt so real. However, every time I walked past the library or even thought of studying there again, a cold feeling would creep up my back. The memories of that night, the whispers, the ghostly figures, it all seemed too real to be just a figment of my imagination. Was it possible that, for just one night, I had crossed paths with a hidden part of the library's past? Maybe a group of students from a bygone era still trying to finish their studies. I may never get a clear answer, but one thing's for sure. The haunting memories of that evening will stay with me forever, a chilling reminder of the mysteries that might lurk in the most unexpected places.